Thanks for waiting around to see my talk, and thank you for Sarah and Paolo for organising this and for inviting me to speak. I am going to speak today on the Potnia Theron. And yes, the Potnia Theron is the mistress of animals. She's a figure in Greek art who is shown holding or controlling wild animals. She's usually associated with the goddess Artemis, and the term Potnia Theron is found in Homer as an epithet of Artemis in the Iliad. For some time, all figures shown in this pose have been identified as Artemis due to their association with animals. However, when we look more closely at these figures, we see some inconsistencies. We see aspects and attributes which are not usually associated with Artemis. We see, for example, fish. We see creatures which are not typically associated with the classical Artemis, so we have to look elsewhere for what these figures might be attributed to. Often these figures, rather than being Artemis, they tend to resemble other goddesses which are less well known in the classical era. There have been some studies undertaken on the name Potnia. These mostly focus on the appearance of the term in the Linear B texts of the 13th and 12th centuries BC. We see a few figures differentiated with this name, although there's some debate if these are separate figures with the same name or different aspects of a single Potnia figure. The Theron part of the name is less commonly studied. This refers to the animals which the figure is shown with, and in overlooking this aspect of the figures, we tend to miss some important details, including how she relates to the animals themselves. The figures showing the Potnia Theron directly controlling animals, that is, physically holding them, are perhaps the most common. She usually holds them with the animal's neck or tail or leg in either of her hands in a symmetrical pose. We can see this in the first two figures here. Another way we see her controlling them is with an unseen method of control. This is where we see her not using her hands to control the animals, but by a suggested or perhaps supernatural type of control over the animals, where we see her with the animals. They face her, they might pose around her, but she doesn't actually touch them with her hands. She doesn't control them physically. We see a range of animals that are represented with this figure. One of the most common of these is the long-necked water birds, such as geese and swans. Sometimes these are shown to be alive, as in figure 1, or as in figure 2, they're shown to be deceased. They're often held by the neck with the body hanging down. Lions or lionesses are quite frequently seen as well. Again, these are often shown held by the neck, but often shown also held by the hind leg or tail, and also held back by the implied control mentioned earlier. When the Potnia Theron is shown holding something like a lion, it also gives us a sense of the scale and the strength of the figure. We see her quite easily picking up something as large as a lion and being much larger and much stronger than they are. Later on we see other animals introduced. We see figures such as deer, but these don't appear until much later in the classical period. What unites the animals that we see with the Potnia Theron is that they are all wild animals. This is the Theron part of her name. Some animals, like the deer, can be herded but not tamed. These animals still very much belong to the wild, and as does the figure of the Potnia herself. She is still very much part of the wild. We can see this again in the hybridity shown in many of the Potnia Theron figures. Most commonly we see her as a woman who is shown with wings. indicating that perhaps she is not supposed to be seen as a mortal figure. There have been a few suggestions for the origins of her wings. The most common of these is to suggest a Near Eastern influence. This would make sense. We do see winged figures in the Near Eastern Master of Animals influence, Master of Animals figures that we find in Near Eastern art. Another suggestion that has been put forward is that the wings are a hangover of the Minoan influence, in which the goddess appears in the form of a bird-shaped epiphany. We do see some variation in the type of wings she has. Some are more realistic and bird-like, while others are more stylized. The most common we see are the upcurving wings, such as the figures are figure 1 and figure 4. We also see figures with 2 sets of wings like these, similar to figure 2. Here they appear to be attached to the front of the body, and they appear much more as attributes rather than as functional appendages which could be used for flight. We also see other animalistic features as part of the Potnia herself. The one from the Rhodian plate, that is figure 2. She's very much like a gorgon. The early gorgon faces often have animal-like features. This one has boar-like tusks, which are shown at the sides of her mouth in addition to her wings. Another one is the Boeotian amphora, that is figure 3. She has wings in place of arms. She doesn't have arms as well. And she has a very unusually shaped face. Her face has been described as being leaf-shaped, but I would suggest rather than being a leaf, what we're seeing here is a beak viewed from the front, giving her a bird-like aspect. We do see earlier figurines with these bird-like beaked faces. We see these in terracotta from places like Tiryns, and much earlier examples from places like Cyprus. We also see bee-bodied figures on jewellery plaques from Rhodes. We see very similar plaques with human-bodied figures. We see these holding both flowers, like the example in figure 4, or we see examples where they hold lions instead. The bee-bodied figures are very interesting because while the body is that of a bee, the wings are not. The wings are more like that of a bird. And this is something that's very much unique to Rhodes. We don't find that elsewhere as far as I've been able to find. And this hybrid element of the Potnia Theron is just one aspect of the type which has been very much understudied. This is likely to be due to the reliance of previous studies on the identification with the figure of Artemis. And if we focus instead on what makes up each of these individual images, such as the examples I've provided here today, we get a very different and far more detailed idea of each of the figures that we're looking at as unique figures with their own identities rather than an overall type. In taking this approach, I'm hoping to shed some new light on the Potnia Theron type, not only as a goddess, but also as a hybrid figure with a whole range of functions and a whole lot more to tell us.